On November 24, 2009, the police force of the small community of New Felsburg, Maine, received a most disturbing phone call from an elderly man living secluded in a house just outside of town. Near the edge of the woods, the man was clearly terrified and panicking, judging by his voice and the fact that he was practically shouting. The senior, who had immigrated from Norway some 20 years ago, complained that some kind of beast was prowling outside of his house, trying to get in. The officer tried to calm the man down, trying to tell him it was probably just a coyote or maybe a bear. In either case, as long as the man had his doors and windows closed, the police officer assured him that the creature could not get in, and that he would be safe until the cops arrived to remove the animal. Strangely enough, this seemed to enrage the man. He began shouting even louder, telling the officer that it isn't that goddamn simple. Immediately after he had finished that last sentence, a loud sound of shattering could be heard in the background, probably on another floor. The man's panicked screaming turned into a terrified whisper. "It's inside! Oh God, help me!" were the last words they could make out, as the sound became more distorted. White noise began becoming audible, at first faintly in the background. It rapidly became louder until it almost was unbearable to hear. By then the officer realized the man was in danger, although he didn't think much of the sudden white noise, as crappy receptions were common in the area. Something had definitely broken into the house. So he got into his police car and took the 10-minute drive to the old man's house, praying he was not too late. Arriving at the scene, he noticed that one of the windows on the bottom floor was broken, like something had come crashing through with great force. There were large claw marks on the front door, but they were unlike any the office had ever seen. They could not have possibly been from a coyote or bear. They were far too large for that. Furthermore, the claws that had inflicted this damage had apparently only 3 fingers, and those fingers had much more distance in between them than even a human hand. By now, the officer was obviously concerned not only for the victim's safety, but for his own as well. As he kicked open the door, the first thing he noticed was how unnaturally dark the house was. While the weather was cold due to the season, it was a reasonably sunny day, and light could and would have been shining brightly through the windows, none of them being covered in curtains. Yet still the house was dark. Not pitch black, but more of a grim, grayish kind of darkness that was usually paired with twilight, like some kind of invisible blankets were covering all the windows, allowing only for so much light to enter the house. With his firearm drawn, the officer carefully ventured into the house. His first priority was to see if its inhabitants were still safe. After checking each room downstairs and finding nothing out of place, nothing even remotely touched, he went upstairs. Now there were only 2 rooms upstairs, a storage room and a bedroom, and he was unsettled by how normal the house was, aside from the darkness. If a wild animal had managed to get in, there would be signs of it wandering through rooms. When he put his hand on the bedroom door's knob, he quickly released it, letting out a short scream of agony. The doorknob was hot, so hot even that it had left an ugly burn mark in the knob shape on the man's palm. His surprise at this was quickly drowned by another, more dominant feeling of fear, when he realized that whatever was inside the house would have heard his scream. He held his breath, his heart thumping in his throat, as he listened for a sound, a creak downstairs, the voice of the man calling out for him, or perhaps the sound of claws, paws making their way up the stairs or through the bedroom to get to him. A few seconds passed like this. Nothing. No sound beside his rapid beating of his own heart. The officer felt ashamed. What was coming over him? Why was he even so scared? He carried a gun. If any wild animal would actually try to attack him, he'd kill it before he came close enough. He had no reason to be scared, right? Then why did he feel like scurrying around like a mouse being watched by a predator? Why did he feel like he was being watched by someone, like something was in there, wanting to kill him? There wasn't anything in the house, though. The bedroom, when he entered, was empty. The phone the man had probably used was off the hook, sitting on the nightstand. The bed was unmade and the sheets were messy, but if anything, that only indicated that he hadn't made the bed this morning. The storage room was equally empty besides a few boxes. There was simply no trace of the man or whatever could have caused those scratches. Further investigations by the police revealed nothing but the man's whereabouts. No clues could be found, no tracks, nor any drops of blood. He'd simply vanished off the face of the earth. After some months, the case went cold. By then, the officer that had received the call and had first entered the house had all but forgotten about his scary experience. Or so it seemed. A few weeks after the case went cold, the officer started to see a psychiatrist. He had began having trouble sleeping. Often he'd lay in bed next to his wife for hours, twisting and turning, unable to feel at ease, somehow feeling unsafe. Whenever he would sleep, he would have nightmares. The exact nature of these nightmares he couldn't recall. Either he wouldn't remember them or was too horrified by them to describe them properly. All he told was that he would wake up from them screaming and in cold sweat, waking up his wife in the process. The psychiatrist suggested he take some time off of work and prescribed him some medication to help sleep. It didn't work. The nightmares persisted, and the officer began to show signs of paranoia. He claimed he felt watched everywhere now, at work, at home, in crowds, and even in the bathroom. He became very high-strung over the few weeks of visiting the psychiatrist, often being visibly startled by even mundane sounds like a car passing by the office or a door closing. His last visit had been particularly disturbing. The officer, by then a stuttering pale mess, claimed that he was being followed by some type of abomination. He described it as a beast walking on all fours that normally was the size of a vehicle, a car. Although it could change its size to fit in smaller places, it had a thin, bony body, its ribs visible beneath its pitch-black fur. The fur became thinner on its arms. These arms were long and spidery and were furless from the elbows down, revealing a pink scaly skin much like a rat. Its hands consisted of 3 long fingers with long yellow claws at the end. These arms were much longer than its hind legs, which were much more compact, completely covered with fur and ending in hooves. The creature had no tail, and when it wasn't running it moved forward like an ape, leaning on its scaled knuckles. The description the psychiatrist found was most disturbing, though, was the head. In between its shoulders, its head was shaped like a jagged ball made of faces. Human faces, all of them pale as snow, all of them individually muttering soundless words and changing expressions as if they had a will of their own. Most of them seemed to be in pain and despair, although a rare few seemed to have been, given into madness, staring at the cop with a wide, crazed grin. He claimed the face of the man who had disappeared from the house was among them. His face stuck in an expression of despair as he cried dry tears and pleaded for help, only to find that he could make no sound. The officer claimed the creature was everywhere. Whenever he was outside, it would stand there at the end of the street, leaning on its knuckles. Whenever he looked out his window, the beast would be looking inside. When the psychiatrist asked the man where the creature was now, he pointed past him, at the window. The psychiatrist followed the man's finger and saw nothing. Yet the officer kept claiming that this beast was standing right outside. The officer then stood up, placed his hands on the psychiatrist's desk, leaning forward as his mouth twisted into a maddened grin. Then he spoke the following words. "It's coming for you next. It's like a virus spreading its taint through contact between people. I made the mistake of entering the house of one of its victims, and you made the mistake of being in the presence of one." His message was followed by a maddened giggle, almost like that of a child. Before he left, he claimed that the psychiatrist couldn't help him. This left the good doctor bewildered and admittedly very unnerved, because apparently the beast was somehow linked to the cold case of the Norwegian man. The psychiatrist did some research on his computer at home, and the next day at the police station, after some digging, he discovered something terrifying. All the officers who had been involved with the case were missing. Some were only recently gone, but others had been gone for months. Apparently all of them had displayed the same symptoms at work, complaints about nightmares and feeling uneasy and stressed. This outright terrified the psychiatrist because he had been trying to call the patient only hours after he left his office, only to get no answer. Even if something had happened to the former cop, his wife would have had to pick up, right? What scared him the most, though, the one thing that sent shivers straight through his spine and caused the hair on his skin to stand straight up was that last night he'd been having an absolutely awful nightmare. Honestly, I did not expect any of this. The concept was incredibly unique. Basically, it's this nightmare that, it wasn't caused by demons possessing you or anything weird or some random pills you found on some Russian website. No. It was a pure mental condition that drives people to the point of utter insanity, slowly but surely. And by just mere exposure to the individual, you yourself also succumb to these nightmares as well. Now, from what I can gather, in the end, you end up just gone. I assume probably from the entire, the fact that you're exposed to this madness, the fact that, you eventually reach a point where you just go, you're up and gone. Now, of course, that could be a little more explained on, but we'll get to how I feel about that truly in the end of this analysis. Now, it's truly terrifying because, hey, if it was to actually be a real thing, and of course, skeptic sides aside, you sort of have to look at these things as a, what if it was a real kind of scenario, you would never be able to tell until it's too late. So really anybody around you, that you're not paying attention to, who has something of this sort, that stuff bleeds onto you and you're fucked as well without even knowing. And that truly is the fearful part. It's sort of like a biological mental terror attack. And for a creepypasta campfire story, I'll be very honest with you. The hairs on my back showed up when I got to that end. I didn't expect this to honestly end the way it did, and just the twist itself was so beautifully handled. It was perfect, and it made the whole story just so gosh darn amazing. Usually I'd ask for more, and a lot more from a story, but I feel that the pacing of this was done well. The build-up is perfect. It gives just enough to make sense, but it's still vague enough to have a sense of eeriness, and that's like the perfect mix of a creepypasta. It's an internet campfire story, that's all it's really supposed to be. It's not supposed to explain everything, down to the bone, but it's also supposed to have that, vagueness. It can't just leave you in the dark. It has to have that perfect mix, and this really nailed it. I didn't expect it. I didn't expect any of this going into it, but I came out thoroughly impressed. And ultimately, I think this is probably one of the better creepypastas that we have read on this channel. And like a virus, I kind of want to see, more to this. I feel like it could definitely have a amazing sequel and more lore building to it itself. It's definitely got something going for it. But the way it handled itself was done well. And I just got to make that a abundant point. And it was a unique concept. You didn't have to deal with possessions. You didn't have to deal with some crazy, cliched stuff we've all seen. It's just a standard mental virus. It's, something that you'll never expect happening to you. And that is truly the terrifying part. Ultimately, though, I want to ask what you all think about this creepypasta in the comments section below. This has been another episode of Creepypastas, part of Haunted Gaming. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. This is me, Muta I, and I am out.